Hello everyone and welcome to episode 6 of Nature Natters, where we are meeting individuals and organisations that are doing amazing things for nature. So today we're meeting Luke from Farm Wilder, and Farm Wilder is an organisation that is working to make farming more sustainable and better for wildlife. So hi Luke, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm well, thanks.
Can you tell us a bit more about Farm Wilder? I've given a very brief introduction, but what's the story? How did it all begin?
Okay, so Farm Wilder is a social enterprise that works with farmers who are grazing habitats for rare and endangered wildlife. So we find farms who are grazing habitats, particularly for cuckoos around the edges of Dartmoor, and then Marsh Fritillary butterflies on common grassland and the wet marshy grasslands in Dartmoor. And we work with them to help them get a better price for their produce and to publicize it as being wildlife friendly. So the idea is to get farmers who are producing the best beef and lamb on the most species rich and diverse and wildlife friendly pastures, and get that out to people and have people understanding the link between that food and the environment that they cherish. And it started with Tim Martin, who worked for the BBC Natural History Unit for a couple of decades, and was executive producer there. And he came away thinking that he wanted to start doing something more kind of tangible, or to take that understanding he had about getting the message out about wildlife, about making it appear wonderful as it is, and thinking how that can be used to bring benefits to farmers and to farmland. And so the message is a big part of it, but it's also a way of getting the farmers paid more money and then asking that habitats are increased across the farming systems that they're working in. So where many of the farmers we work with have some areas of wonderful habitat, often quite big areas of wonderful habitat, there's often a smaller part of the farm that is used a little more kind of conventionally. And so what we do is work with the farmers and work with some other organisations to look at ways of sustainably managing that land in a way that is sustainable. There's a lot of buzzwords around this, I think, regenerative, and crucially builds more habitats into the farming system, the productive farming system. So it's not a separation between extensive grazing land that you might see on the moors or around the edges of the moors, and then your intensive kind of better land on the lowlands. We look to try and soften that gap and to bring more wildlife down from the hills and get it expanding out onto the lowlands. So that's the meat and bones of it.
Okay.
So
you focused on cuckoos and fritillaries, isn't it, butterflies? Why have you focused on them in particular?
So we wanted species that are good indicators of wider ecological health. And cuckoos obviously parasitize a number of different birds, but in the uplands they parasitize meadow pipits, and they rely on feeding their young big hairy caterpillars. So for the larvae of things like emperor hawk moths. So it's a kind of indicator in that sense. But also they're wildlife species that need grazing. So if you chose a woodland species or a riparian species, it would be something that exists alongside farms predominantly. Whereas we're interested in the point where the animal acts as a kind of, it fills a niche within an ecosystem, say, and if you removed it, you'd lose that habitat. Because that, as far as we see, that's one of the key outputs of livestock farming going into the future, that it's the one food type that can do both. It can be a tool for nature conservation and food. So we want to see that in the middle there.
Yeah, so like farmers obviously have quite a lot of pressures on them to be producing and making money, do you think like being like grazing can be profitable as well as wildlife friendly?
Well, yeah, I mean that's what we're hoping for. That's what we're pushing for. It's a difficult and complicated question, that, but effectively it has to be, because everything is moving in the direction of farming, and particularly livestock farming, needing to be sustainable. On its own, it's not the most efficient form of food production, and so when you boil matters down to the kind of bare numbers, as the vegan lobby tend to do, you can quite easily say this isn't a very effective way of using land. And as land becomes more precious, it's already very precious, has been for a long time, but it will increasingly become so. And there's more pressure on it for different land uses. Whether you're talking, from things that are quite diffuse, like flooding, and the way that impacts in towns, or things that are more immediate, like wildlife, things that happen on the land itself, and recreation and tourism, and all of those economic pressures that come with that. There is this push for farmers to find the balance, basically, and there's a lot of people who will put forward numbers to say that low input and reduced output models on farming is the only way to go. But everyone finds numbers to support whatever agenda they have at any time, so I'm not going to do that. But saying that, with a decent enough price for the produce, then there's a model that can really work, which makes the most out of what the land will naturally produce and minimizes expensive inputs, and whether that's supplementary feed or fertilizer, those are the two key ones. And a lot of it is about working with farmers to explore how that can work, how that sustainable, productive approach can work. So where you can get your balanced nutrition from within the grasses and the herbs and the legumes, and even the trees that come with that. And how that in turn can feed back into the soil and build up productivity. So many of the things that people talk about now, trying to tap into that, and it's something that crosses the barriers of organic and conventional, and stops it being a simple conversation. And the conversation has changed dramatically in the last 5-10 years already, and it's continuing to go down that route, which is all very exciting, really.
And it's good that it's good, yeah, you're promoting kind of the awareness, isn't it? Because for the consumer, I guess, like you're saying, that vegans feel strongly about not eating meat, but actually maybe we could eat it less often, but try and choose farms that are doing it in a sustainable manner. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. Sorry, go
on. So yeah, do you have any kind of advice for consumers who are thinking they want to switch? How can they find out about farms that are managing for wildlife?
So it's I wish I had a really easy kind of go-to answer here, and I do in one way: shop at Farm Wilder, obviously. And we do online sales. So you can go through Fresh Range, who is a retail partner we work with, who courier around to different places in the country. And in North Devon, we work with Hiran's Butcher in Bideford. And so they've got Farm Wilder on for at least a week a month, normally the first week of the month. But everything they do is good. And so I think the trick is, a lot of this can be done by breed. If you're trying to work out which beef particularly has come from farms that are more extensive, the best indicator you can have, if you haven't got anything else to go on, is if they're a native breed or if they're not. Native breeds were designed to feed off the landscape as it is, whereas the more conventional commercial ones have been bred right up, and you have to fill them full of maize and oilseed rape and all these other things to get them fat. So if you look for the smaller animals like the North Devon cattle, which are around the place, and you ask your butcher which animals he's got, and if he's got things like North Devons or Herefords or Belted Galloways or Longhorns, then you know, or you don't know, but you've got a pretty good indicator that you're onto something quite good. So talk with your butchers, ask them questions, and failing that, come shop at Farm Wildlife.
And so one of our pledges for nature is to hire the flail of hedgerows. So that's sort of like managing those the farm. You've got kind of a set of standards that you kind of work with farmers. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
So the set of standards is, it's the first thing we do is we require that everything is 100% grass fed, or where farmers aren't already 100% grass fed, that they transition to become so within 3 years, and that the animals they sell through Farm Welder have had, if any, then only a tiny bit of grain, wheat or barley. So that's the idea of that, is that by only eating pasture, the animals have to find their nutritional balance within what the ground can produce naturally. And so you get your proteins from things like clovers, and instead of getting your proteins from crops like soya or oilseed rape. And then you get your sugars from the grasses, but you get trace elements or the fiber from the herbs that come up. And these are all things that produce flowers and that are habitat for a whole world of invertebrates that then feed the wider wildlife. So that's a simple and kind of vaguely elegant thing, I guess, to build it on. And we do that in partnership with Pasture for Life. But then we ask more specific things around things like hedges and cutting them on rotation. So you're not cutting them back every year, and increasing the height of your flail so that they're growing and building the integrity of the shrub species within the hedge. But also that the hedge doesn't just end at the hedge, that there's good margins next to it, because that's crucial habitat. That the hedge can be thought of as mimicking kind of successional woodland, the edges of a woodland, where you get some of the richest biodiversity in the country in those areas. But if it stops bang at the edge of the hedge, and then you've got a heavily or cultivated field going straight out from there, then you lose that important bit of tusky grassland that's ideally rich in flowers, which is where the breeding birds feed their chicks, where you get the small mammals nesting and moving through, things like hedgehogs using vital corridors, grass snakes. It's those bits that are equally crucial. So we have some standards around that, requiring that margins are left, as well as that sufficient breaks are left in grazing or for cutting in diverse fields, whether that's diverse lays or species-rich fields, and limits on nitrogen, so that only a small amount of the farm that is for the silage making can have much use on it, which we don't want to completely eliminate it, because we're trying to avoid just working with the organic farmers. But it normally is a very small part of the farm. And then we require that every farmer will work with plants by lot trees. So that's 7 trees per hectare across the farm within the first 3 years, and that will then grow. And we're working with them to put them into silvopastoral systems, so that they're part of the grazing platform, rather than trying to break down this kind of straight line between woodland and farming that we've had in England as the dogmatic approach forever, or for a long time at least. So we're working with FWAG, the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, on a silvopasture trial with the Woodland Trust and Rothamsted Research and the Innovative Farmers to work with 8 farmers, 2 of which are Farm Wilder farmers, to introduce silvopasture systems, which means trees that can be grazed among and grazed upon, I guess, so that they provide benefits for the animals and shade and shelter and nutritional browse, as well as environmental benefits. So we're trying to encourage that as far as we can, because we think that it's a big part of the future of livestock farming, which would be wonderful. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if the open grazed woodlands that you see in some parts of the world, you get them in places like Spain, you get them occasionally in England, if they can be used as a productive mechanism for feeding animals, making them healthier and happier, and getting a good amount of produce out of the land. So we're pushing that. And there's a number of other standards that I'm not going to go through one by one because it go on for a while.
Okay, that's great. So I guess we'll kind of start rounding things up, but have you got any advice for farmers, like if they want to start thinking about making their, I guess there's the old school thinking of keeping everything neat and tidy. I guess that's one of the things, is to let things get a bit wilder, but is there any advice?
Well, that one is key, in that I have this on with my parents. Everyone who's from a family that does any type of farming, there's normally some type of generational divide here. And the conversation I have with them is around trying to see the excitement in letting things get a bit scruffier. And it is exciting. It's a process of discovery, seeing what will happen if you have some brambles, leaving them, not everywhere, but in places, and seeing what that bramble patch will become a few years down the line, and whether you'll get hawthorn coming through it, or oak, or whatever it might be, and dormice breeding in there. So it is one to try and embrace the messiness to some extent. But that also isn't for everybody, and a lot can be done within the productivity of the farm. And so a simple one, a lot of farmers I work with are interested in introducing more species diversity into their lays. So things like bird's foot trefoil, which can help with an anthelmintic, can help with internal parasite burden, and chicory, which does the same, but is also dense and roots down forever into the soil, so it can bring up water and trace element. Things like that. A lot of farmers are concerned about putting them in because they think they'll have a dock problem, and they rely on herbicides to spray off the docks and to leave what there is in the ley. But the problem is that kills off anything that's not grass. If that is the case, then the approach we work with farmers who are in that situation is to stitch in those legumes and herbs at a later date after the docks have been dealt with. So there's a 2-point establishment period. So the grasses deal with the docks through whatever means, through topping or whatever else you need, and then stitch in all of the other stuff. And it means that you can build in beautiful, diverse lays that serve a world of benefits, agriculturally and environmentally, without struggling to try and do everything organically immediately. So that's quite a technical bit of advice, but it might be useful for some.
No, that sounds good. Have you got any recommended sources of information? Is it best to go to you or to Flag? Or?
Well, both really. I mean, to come to me and I'll give or maybe you'll give my email address, or to Flag office. There's a lot of advisors at Flag, and everybody's very well trained up. So yeah, either if you want information, as in just ideas and research, then the agroecology website is very good. It's all about innovations within this particular space of sustainable, productive farming. So looking at things like integrated pest management or whatever it might be. So that's a good resource.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you, Luke. So yeah, this is Farm Wilder. Look them up if you're looking for meat that's a bit more sustainably farmed. And thank you for listening.